right. Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I don't want to say this to scare you, but this is being recorded today because it's been requested. But that shouldn't matter. But last week we had a comment or a couple comments about. I'm going to try to repeat what the comments are coming in because this is recorded, but also because some people were having trouble last week hearing what some of the other people were sharing. So I'll try to paraphrase or repeat if we do have discussion. So hopefully we do, so I can practice that. Also, I just want to go quickly into a review of what we talked about last week and what our objective is in this portion of the Sunday school. So Nathan started out at the beginning of Exodus. We are now picking up in chapter 7 with the 10 plagues, chapter 7 through 11 or 12. And we're tracing the same theme, and that theme is God revealing his name, Yahweh, his character, to not only his people, but to the world, to the nations. And so for these 10 plagues, we're going to be, we started last week looking at the symbolism within these plagues and how they opposed Pharaoh and the Egyptian gods, what that kind of looked like. And we also are going to be looking at symbolisms within the plagues and how they parallel the creation story. We're going to be looking at a little bit into the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, discuss that a little bit. We're also going to talk about the magician's replication or attempt to replicate the plagues and kind of how they were limited in that and what that says about God as well. And then we're going to be looking at how the plagues, how God, through the plagues and especially the last plague, how this points to Jesus. And again, through all of this, we want to look at how God revealed himself to Egypt, Israel, and to everyone who reads this. So that's the main thing, how God reveals himself, what it says about his character, who he is. So we started last week looking at the plagues and how they kind of are pointed, geared towards a particular Egyptian god, or maybe several, and what that ultimately says about our God, what he is revealing through that. Before we do that, I do want to read the 2 verses that I read, it's actually 4 verses that I read last week, because it's a good place to come back to. So Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 to 2, it says, "Afterward Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness.' Pharaoh said, 'Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go.'" And we said, Pharaoh is basically setting the table. I don't know this God, and God is getting ready to reveal himself in a very personal way to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt. And then in Exodus chapter 9, verses 15 to 16, and this would have been in the around the plague of the hail, it says, "For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth." So we see here that God's purpose through these plagues and his patience with Egypt is so that the whole world may know his name. They might hear about these things, and God might be glorified and made known. So, as I said last week, we started with looking at these. We only got through the first 3 plagues. So, just as a real quick review, the first plague was the blood. The water turned to blood, and this was pointed at. I wrote down 3 gods: Hapi, the Egyptian god of the Nile; Khnum, guardian of the river source, Osiris. That was said to be, the Nile was said to be his bloodstream. And we said that, God mocks these. They could not protect the water source. They could not bear water for their people. And literally it being turned to blood is a mock at Osiris. And we said through this that God is displaying or revealing that he is the source of life and the sustainer of life, as water is a life source. The second plague was the plague of the frogs. This was directed towards the Egyptian goddess Heket, who had a frog face. She was the goddess of fertility and abundance and water and renewal. And so we said that in this, it kind of was like a play on words. She was this goddess of fertility and abundance, and then they became inundated with frogs. And this Heket was mocked by this inundation. And for us, God is telling, or telling them rather, that God is the provider. He is the provider. He makes things fertile. He gives abundantly. And then again, this was the plague of an inundation of frogs. And the third one that we left off on was either Seb or Geb, which was the Egyptian god of the earth. This is the plague of lice or gnats from the dust of the earth. And we said this was kind of a creation versus destruction type of thing, where Geb is mocked as he was the god of the earth, god of dust and desert sand. And so out of that came this plague, these gnats, and God created it. And this was the first one that the magicians were not able to replicate. And so we said that, God, this tells us that God is our creator. God is the creator. And so that's where we're going to pick up. We are picking up in the fourth plague. And how these plagues are put together, there's actually three triads, according to people who are much smarter than me. These are set up in three groups of three, and then the last plague is kind of by itself. So we're picking up on the second triad, the Egyptian plague, the swarm of the flies. So something to note about this is the first time that God makes a distinction between Egypt and the land of Goshen, his people, the Israelites. So he says the first three plagues, everyone kind of had to deal with that right in that localized area of Egypt. I don't believe they were worldwide, but they were localized to Egypt. But now there's a distinction between the Israelites and the Egyptians. So the swarm of flies come, they fill the houses, they cover the ground, but only for the Egyptians and not for the Israelites. So there's a distinction there. The god that this is aimed towards would be, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Khepri. He's the Egyptian god of the movement of the sun, rebirth, and creation in a sense, in some form of creation and life. So these the swarm, and he also has an insect-like head. Some pictures have him having a beetle head, others a fly head, and there's also So I think those are the two that come up for him. But anyway, he's kind of the one that scholars believe this would have been geared towards. So when I was when I think of swarms of flies, I think of what flies like to land on and stuff, and it's never anything good. It's always gross stuff. But a lot of times it's like dead, rotting things. And so my mind kind of went to these swarms of flies, kind of symbolizing decay. And then, that's kind of the point. Egypt itself, is these plagues are weighing on them. They're kind of decaying, breaking under these plagues as God reveals his name. And this swarm of flies comes in, and it is very much a nuisance, but I think it's also kind of symbolizes that decay. And so out of that, I believe God is revealing that he preserves his people. So I think it's a decay versus preservation type of thing. And also, since this is the first one that God makes a distinction, I think that there's much to say about that God is preserving his people from this plague. So that was kind of my thoughts on that plague. And if anyone would like to share in on that, you can, or draw some other parallel or something, that would be welcomed. I will say I wanted to have one overall discussion question for today. I wanted to give you at the beginning that I forgot to, that when we get to the end, you guys would have, excuse me, plenty of time to have thought about, and so we have some discussion on it. And this comes out of something that Nate said last time, is that, we were kind of hard on the Egyptians, saying, well, if we'd have been there and we'd have saw these things, how could they not believe? And I think Nate's comment had something to do with, God reveals himself to us throughout our lives, and a lot of times we're still running to these idols, these things, or we're placing them above God in our life, even though time and time again God is revealing himself to us and his character. So with that being said, and I might be misquoting you a little bit, but that's good. Nate says that, he gives the thumbs up. So the main discussion question that I want us to be thinking about is, what are ways that God has revealed himself to you? It could be through, a loss. It could be through something that just clicked and things happened and things worked out. And also with that, maybe what are, if there are people willing to share maybe about a season in life where you were distracted from that with these other idols, these other gods that you were more focused on, and things like that. So we'll kind of open that up near the end. We'll continue on in the teaching, but know that during the teaching, if you guys want to speak up or add to or have a question, we can do that. We're going to try to get through the 10 plagues and then also have time to discuss. So we'll move on from the fourth plague to the fifth, and this was the death of the cattle and livestock. And so this was another one where this only affected Egypt. It was not both. So that was kind of the tipping point, the one before. But with this, I did some reading on this, and because when I first read about that, the cattle and livestock, my mind only went to like farming, like, oh, that would be bad for all the farmers. Maybe they're them trying to produce milk, and just more of a food type of this would be kind of affecting their food. And I think that it did. It surely affected their farming and their food sources and things like that. But one thing that came up in my research was that this would have greatly impacted the military of Egypt, that they would have, kind of been, I don't want to say defenseless, but they definitely couldn't be on the offense very well without these horses and things like that. And it was something I never really thought of. But also the Egyptian god or goddess, Hathor, she has is depicted as having a cattle or a cow face, but she is the goddess of love and protection, and read some places where they drew that kind of comparison, that she was this goddess of protection, and this livestock and cattle plague would have deeply affected Egypt's military. And so obviously this goddess having a cattle face, a cow face, I don't know how you say that, a cattle face or a cow face, but anyway, a face of a cow is obviously mocked because that's one of the animals that was affected. But also, she could not protect Egypt as the goddess of protection, whereas God did protect Egypt, and he is, I think what he is revealing about his character is that he is the protector as well. Any thoughts on the first two that we've gone through? I don't want to just talk at you, but... I'll take a drink, and then we'll continue on if no one says anything. All right. What are we up to? I don't have these numbered. The sixth plague would have been the boils or sores. And so they take soot from the furnace. Moses takes these ashes basically and throws them up in the air, and then they spread out and they fall on people and they cause boils and sores, these festering boils, and also on the beasts of the field as well, not just people. So they take these ashes of affliction and they throw them up, and they become an affliction on Egypt, causing these festering boils. And so this one is geared towards Isis, I guess, is Isis is the Egyptian goddess of medicine and peace. And so they call this goddess out because of she's also the goddess of medicine and healing and peace. And some of the people that I read, some of the sources I read, called her out because these festering boils that they would have experienced there would have been, a lot of, there wouldn't have been much peace. Also, they would have had tried many medicinal things. They were a culture that was really kind of elevated as far as medical practices to a point. I mean, for an ancient culture, they were probably one of the better ones that understood at least parts of being clean and things like that. And these festering boils were really an unclean thing, and they would have tried to use their knowledge of medicine and healing and things like that, but would have been unable to do anything to these boils. And so this goddess of medicine and healing and peace would have kind of been who would have been under attack. God would have kind of called this goddess out as the boils disrupted the peace. They afflicted the Egyptians, and they could not find a cure or remedy in their medicine or anything like that. So, and they wouldn't have found healing from their gods. So, with this, I think that it's kind of two things that I thought of that God is revealing about Himself. One being that God is our healer, that He is the cure, and also that He is the purifier and cleanser. And I think that one of the reasons, and we're going to get into this in a little more detail probably when we talk about the magicians, but it says that this one, the magicians were unable to come and stand before Pharaoh with Moses and Aaron. And I read several things that said it wasn't just the pain and that they were covered, that they didn't want to come because they were covered in boils, but it was because they were considered unclean and were unable to stand before Pharaoh. So I think there is an element of symbolism that is geared towards God cleansing us and purifying us. And so He is our healer, He is the cure, He is the purifier and cleanser. Continuing on, the plague of hail. So hail rained down like it has never been seen before and will never be seen again. And there was lightning and thunder and all of those things. So it was a really bad storm. And God, this is also another place where it's a tipping point or there's something that changes. God warns Pharaoh, and actually some of the Egyptians for the first time heed the warnings. They go and they get their slaves and get their livestock or what's left of that, and they bring them in out of before the storm comes. And again, this is one where Israel is still protected, but some of the Egyptians are actually starting to believe what God is saying, what Moses and Aaron are telling Pharaoh is going to happen. They're beginning to trust that what God says he's going to do, he's going to do. So I have a couple notes off to the side on this one. But first, the Egyptian goddess of the sky is the goddess Nut, and that would be who would have, goddess of the sky would also have a lot to do with weather and those sorts of things. So this goddess is called out because that's kind of her realm to be over, and there's this storm like the like has never been seen before. There's a division now felt between the Egyptians in the form of those who will believe what the Lord has to say, and they will go and be obedient, and in a way obedient. They'll go and prepare to protect their houses. And then the other thing I have written down here says that the crops that were destroyed by the hail, it says it was those crops that were ready for harvest, and in verses 31 and 32 it talks about them being, I believe, flax and barley, which would have been already ripe and ready for harvest. And these two particular crops actually weren't a main part of their diet. They were actually used specifically for clothing and libations. So they used the barley for beer and flax to make clothes. So this, again, attacks part of their economy in making the clothing, some practical uses for those things, but then also kind of some of their pleasure as well, but it didn't attack necessarily their main food source. We'll see that in another plague. But for this one, so this is more of another one that's more of a discomfort. It's starting to be felt, but it's still not fully being felt by all of Egypt. But anyway, this goddess of the sky, this would be one that I kind of have two things written down. It's kind of a nurture versus torment, maybe type of thing, or a cultivate versus destroy. I try to come up with, in preparing, I try to come up with like two opposites or two things that are kind of parallel, but are kind of a play on words. And so I kind of view this as that God cultivates. He's our cultivator and protector from the storm, and the storm comes in from the sky and destroys. He also nurtures us, and they would have been torment. Maybe is a strong word, but again, it would have affected them. It would have made them uncomfortable to lose these crops that they did, and also all the people that lost their lives and things like that. But I think what God is revealing about himself is that he is our comforter, and that he cares for us, and that he is that refuge from the storm. Those who believed and brought their animals and slaves in were protected from the storm. They found a place of refuge, and I think that's part of what is being revealed about our God. Next, we have the plague of the locust. And so the locusts come in, and they basically everything that's left that the hail didn't destroy, this is what the locusts come in and eat. And this would have been the later crops like wheat and rye, and these would have been the main food crops. And this would have really been felt. Egypt was this land of plenty. People were used to having what they wanted, and they lost some of their comfort items, but now they lost their staples, their food staples, and so it's being felt deeper and deeper. And so there's this idea of plenty versus famine, or plenty versus want, and there's also the idea of order versus disorder from this. And the Egyptian god that they call out would be Seth, the Egyptian god of disorder. And And this would have surely caused disorder when, they lost their livestock earlier, they lost some of their comforts, and now they're losing these, the main things. And so there would probably be a lot of disorder in this. He's also the God of storms, which is odd because we just went over a storm. You'd have thought maybe that would be called out, but they said this would be not so much the weather as it would be things from the, I forget, I should have written it down how it was described, was kind of these things of the air, kind of more of the air type thing rather than, and again, air and sky are close, but the goddess of the sky was more the weather events. This god of the storms was more of things of the air. So anyway, this Egyptian god that they call out, this god of disorder and of storms, he would be mocked under the disorder that came from the locust. And then also the disorder in the form of famine and how things were turned upside down. This land of plenty is now in want. And I believe what God is saying about himself in this is that God is our sustenance, that God calms the storm, and he brings order to our circumstances. Does anyone have anything to add on those? And again, these are kind of, I'm drawing like opinions off of what I read from other people. They kind of say, here's the god or goddesses that they feel that were attacked, but they didn't really go into what is God revealing through this. So I'm trying to take these things because I want to trace that element of what is God revealing about his character, about himself, to these Egyptians who are trusting in these gods to protect them. And so if you guys have other ideas, this is not, I'm not getting this from anywhere other than I'm making it up, basically, is what I'm saying. So also, I need to stop for another drink, so if you guys want to talk, you can. If not,
I do have a question.
Okay.
It's not really about the gods, but I was wondering, is there any time or record of time how long these plagues last? Because between the hail and the I've seen the number. It says about the wheat and the rye have not grown yet.
Yeah.
And then the locust came and ate that. So is there any record of it? Do we have record of time, how long they lasted or how long the space was in between the plagues?
No, I know the only plague that I think has a definitive time frame was between the first and the second. It says 7 days passed that the water was blood before the frogs came. The other ones, yeah, I think between the flax and barley and between that, I think there was, I don't think it was the next day or the next week. I think there was a time period. It seems to me that these were ready for harvest. They got hurt by the hail, but these other things were, young and tender. They didn't get hurt, and they continued to grow. And then when they were ready, before harvest, obviously, then the locusts came and eat them. We don't have. I can look into that. I'm sure there's people who probably tried to tackle that. I didn't see anything in just reading through the plagues a few times in the preparation. I didn't see anything that said that really set up the time frames. I would think this was something that happened relatively close together. It's not like this was a decade of a plague every year, but I think it was kind of spread out. I think it was a season of these plagues, not just, all right, in the next month you're going to get hit with these 10 plagues. But other than kind of this example between the crops, there's not a whole lot to go by as the spacing. They're just kind of recorded as one right after another. So.
Where'd they get their horses?
Exactly. Yeah, they had to have time to get more horses and things like that, and so I think there was some time in there.
One thing I see as well is you see the points you're bringing out about God showing he's more powerful than the other gods, and a way his people who can replicate some of the stuff and do some of the same things. In some ways, God's also saying, I'm stronger than you as well. I'm
Yeah.
stronger than the people you have set up. And Pharaoh, one of the things says, one of the plagues, Moses is telling him that you need to humble yourself before God. And just that lack of humility, like that Pharaoh, God's kind of showing, hey, I'm stronger than you too, but Pharaoh as a human is not wanting to, I guess, give way to that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I'm not confused by what you said. I'm just trying to think how I'm going to paraphrase all that so that the recording picks it all up. That was, yeah, so the first question, this is just for the recording, was about, do we know the time frames of these plagues? How long was in between? We talked about that. And then Nate brought up a good point about, or several points about, God is showing that he's more powerful than Pharaoh, who will not humble himself, who will not believe, will not let the people go. And Pharaoh has all these gods and all these magicians and this infrastructure of leaders and things in Egypt that he's trusting more in. And God is breaking down each thing. I know I didn't get completely what you said. What else could I tell? That was good enough? Okay. Nate says that's good enough. That's the second time I've said that. Give me the thumbs up twice today. I think that's really, all of these things, God's saying in every way, I'm more powerful than you are. I'm more powerful than the gods you're trusting in to bring forth fertility, and I'm more powerful than the ones that you cling to for all these different things that you're trusting in. I'm the provider of them. I'm the protector of them. I'm more powerful in every way. We'll go into the last two plagues. I don't know if we will have time to discuss that discussion question. If we don't, we'll start with that one next week. You guys have a whole week to think about it. But so the ninth plague is the 3 days of darkness. Again, there's a distinction between Israel and Egypt. So Egypt is in the dark. They're in this palpable darkness. It's so dark it can be felt. It's so thick, and it lasts for 3 days. While the Israelites were not affected by that, they were not in the dark. So this one, I think, lends itself to a lot of symbolism, especially spiritual. When we think of spiritual, being in the dark spiritually and things like that. I think the God that would be kind of the focus of this would have been their top god other than Pharaoh. And the only reason Pharaoh was, his deity, Pharaoh was seen as the son of Ra, or Re, the sun god, and that's the one that this is directed toward. But the only reason that Pharaoh is supposedly the son of Ra. The only reason Pharaoh is above him is because he is there with the people, and so he's elevated himself kind of above. But this is basically their top god other than Pharaoh, the sun god Ra. And so obviously we can see that the sun, this god of the sun, it's dark for 3 days. God's definitely saying, look, I'm more powerful than you. I can control the sun. I can make it dark, and it was dark just for them. They wouldn't have been able to move around and things. They were just confined and just really prisoners of that darkness. And so, like the verses, I view light versus darkness, but there's also that idea of good versus evil, and things like that within this plague of darkness. And the sun was worshipped by the Egyptians, and it was something that was dependable. It was reliable. They knew that the sun rose each day. They had ways of measuring. This is a little fuzzy in my research because I did not write it down. There's something about they were able to measure things using the sun. and because of the sun's consistency and things like that, they were mathematicians that could depend on the sun, and so in many different ways they depended on the sun, and to them the sun was reliable and consistent, until it wasn't, until it was taken away for 3 days, until they were in that darkness for 3 days. For this one, I think we could say a lot of things about what God is revealing about himself. God is light, God is good, God is consistent, he is constant, he's reliable, and everything should be measured from him. That was one thing I just thought of since I was talking about how they measured things. But everything could be measured against his word. I think you could go on, I think you could draw many things. I think of the spiritual implications, as I said earlier, how we're spiritually blind and how light comes into the world. It says in John chapter 1, and how that light was rejected, how people wanted to stay in the darkness and things like that. I think there's a lot of symbolism as far as our spiritual natures in that as well, and the nature of these who seek after other gods, how they're blinded and in the dark. That leads us to the last one. And so this last one, the death of the firstborn, we're going to be, today we're kind of just going to be looking at it, going through it like we did these other ones pretty quickly, just calling out who's kind of being mocked here, what God is revealing about himself. But we're going to get more into this one in a couple different parts of this Sunday school. So if you think we just kind of rushed through this one, we will be coming back to this one especially to take a deeper look. But this one was geared towards all the Egyptian gods, but first and foremost, it was directed directly at Pharaoh. So the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh went after the male children of Egypt. We talked about that in the first plague, and when that turned to blood, that was also kind of somewhat of a play on words to Pharaoh, because it was kind of ironic because he had filled the Nile with Hebrew babies and Hebrew male babies, and now that was kind of filling that with blood. The blood was calling out, type of thing, like with Cain and Abel. But this is, Pharaoh was affected. His firstborn son was killed. His heir was taken. And also, the gods were these immortal beings that death did not touch them. Death did not, even though Pharaoh would die and they'd be mummified and things. It was they had this power over life and death, whereas this shows that God is more powerful and he truly has the power over life and death. So a couple of things I have written down here. Let me just read through that because I don't know if that's for the next part or not. Oh, yeah, so I'll get to that in just a moment. But so this idea, this is what finally kind of breaks Pharaoh. And, he had been bargaining with with God or with the Israelites for a while. Like, he would say, yeah, I'll let you go, but don't go too far. Or just take leave your children and your old people, and just you take the men and things like that. And he never. They said no to all those things. But this time he's kind of broken. But he still is. This time he says, "Well, leave your animals behind." And the idea probably being that Egypt had suffered, all their animals were taken. They probably didn't have a whole lot left. They were probably pretty ravaged. And they thought, maybe if we just have all their things, we can be rid of these people, be rid of the plagues, and we can start anew. Of course, Moses says, no, these are for the sacrifice. You can't take what we're going to be sacrificing. And that was just, when I read that, it kind of brought that idea of Abraham. He goes up and he's willing to sacrifice his son, and then God provides a scapegoat. And here the Israelites are trying to get away from Pharaoh, and they're wanting to take and go sacrifice to the Lord, and Pharaoh wants to withhold what is not his. And it's just kind of I haven't had that thought really fleshed out too much, but it was something that struck me as interesting as I read through that a couple times. But what I believe that this is saying about our God is that, this plague of the death of the firstborn is that God is our Savior, God is our deliverer, God is our Redeemer. It points to, and as I said, we're going to be looking at that, it points to his Son, Jesus Christ, coming and being that Passover lamb for us, and things of that nature. And Pharaoh is mocked by his firstborn being killed, and we talked about him killing the firstborns, or the males in the Nile. He's mocked as the slaves are freed. He held them in bondage, and now they're being freed. They're leaving, and he's left just in much worse shape than just a few years ago. And so they are left in a state that they need to be delivered from and redeemed from. So those are kind of what I wanted to point out from what maybe the Egyptian side of that, what they would have seen, the gods they would have trusted in, and how God said, I'm more powerful than each of these in every way. Everything that you're seeking from them, I'm the provider of, I'm the author of, type of thing. So we're going to continue next week. I think we will start off with next week that discussion question, since we don't have time here. What are ways that God has revealed himself to you, and if there are people willing to share of seasons in their life when maybe they were looking to these other idols for satisfaction or fulfillment or things like that. We'd be willing to hear those things, and then we'll probably take a Sunday at least to look at the hardening of Pharaoh's heart and the magicians and what that kind of says about God before we move into the symbolism and how it parallels creation. I think that's the most interesting part, and we'll kind of save that for next to last, and then the last will be how these plagues, especially the last one, points to Jesus. Let's say a quick prayer. I wanted to do that. Sorry, is that funny to you, Trevor?
I laughed. Sorry.
I didn't want to go too long, but I wanted to start ending or beginning with prayer. So let's do that. Father God, we are grateful for this day. We're thankful for this time that we can come and learn more about your character and how you reveal yourself and how you reveal yourself through these plagues. And may it just encourage us to know that we are trusting in the most powerful God, the only God, the one and only God. And God, we just pray that you would be with us today, that you would prepare our hearts for the sermon, that you would just prepare our hearts for the time of worship. God, we just ask that you would be with us this week. We pray that we would turn from all the idols in our lives, and that we would just trust in you, and we would rest in you. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.